By now, you've probably lived long enough to realize that life can get out of hand pretty quick. One minute you're on top of the world basking in the glory of your fortunate circumstances, and then the next, you're wondering, how in the hell did that happen? And of course, it always seems like it's the really great things in life that don't stick around long enough, while the senseless, irritating garbage seems to have an infinite lifespan. It's like one of life's cold, hard, unfair truths. But as we get older, we start to appreciate more of those great times because in the back of our minds, we know that nothing lasts forever because the world itself is ever flowing, constantly morphing, shifting itself around universal law and humanity's choices. And you know what? That sucks. In the 1970s, no other motorcycle manufacturer was basking in their fortunate circumstances more than Hodaka Motorcycles, a company that was unexpectedly born out of desperation between a Japanese engine builder and a fertilizer company from Oregon, a company who had never built a complete motorcycle before, one that would have to contend with a currency war and an oil crisis. Yet somehow, in just 3 short years, they went from relative obscurity to going head-to-head in sales with the likes of Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki. And they did it with a loud, unapologetic style that made them the choice of every racer, every hipster, every urbanite, and every teenage boy in America. They won the hearts of riders with colorful paint schemes and cartoon character-like bike names: the Dirt Squirt, Combat Wombat, Road Toad, Thunderdog, and Suoer Rat. They use clever vocabulary in their advertisements like Four Slicer, 100 Cubic Clams, Ace of Hots, and Hodakability. But Hodakas were not just marketing gimmicks. They were great motorcycles ridden by legends like Brad Lackey, Jim Pomeroy, Tom Rapp, Gary Bailey, Kenny Roberts, Chuck Sun, Sammy Miller, Harry Taylor, and the list goes on. But as quickly as Hodaka conquered the world, they would scurry off to oblivion, coming in and out of our lives like a summer love, relegating the lasting memories to the deepest part of our brains only used for nostalgic purposes. The kind of memories that chew on us from the inside out, leaving us with the unanswered question of how in the hell did that happen? So in today's video, we'll take a look at the meteoric rise and fall of Hodaka Motorcycles and try to answer that question of how in the hell did that happen? It's the late 1950s, long before Hodaka Motorcycles ever existed, and there was this company called Farm Chemical that distributed fertilizer and shell agriculture products throughout the Pacific Northwest. And its 3 owners, Ed Miley, Jerry Whitney, and Clarence Hesp, are staring down the face of a potential nightmare, as the United States government is considering the termination of all farm subsidies after the 1960 elections. Now obviously, if this happens, it's game over for Farm Chemicals. And at this point in time, they have no choice but to look for other solutions to diversify their business interests. And based on their current network and resources, they decide at the time that their very best and most viable option is to engage in international trade with Japan. Now, they chose Japan because at the time the Japanese needed American currency in order to buy wheat and other crops. And by trading goods and services with Japan, the currency issue could be sidestepped. So they send Clarence Hesp to Japan on a reconnaissance mission to seek out a series of new business opportunities. And when Clarence returns to the United States, he presents to his partners 3 of the very best opportunities that he found. 1, the importation of boats. 2, the importation of furniture. Or 3, the importation of motorcycles. Well, this seems like an easy decision to me. Now, lucky for the rest of the world, they settled on the importation of motorcycles, and they chose a company called Yamaguchi Motorcycles that was owned and operated by Shigehiko Yamaguchi. Yamaguchi Motorcycles was an established brand in Japan, and they were desperate at the time to break into the United States market. And Farm Chemical believed with Yamaguchi's quality combined with Farm Chemical's business savvy, they could sell a multitude of motorcycles in America. America. So Farm Chemical pressed ahead and started to establish a dealer network in the United States and finalized negotiations with Yamaguchi. From here, Farm Chemical creates a business entity called the Pacific Basin Trading Company, also known as PBATCO, in 1961. And they hire Henry Hank Kepka to spearhead the company's efforts. Now, I do hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. That's how Google told me to do it. If not, I deeply apologize. Now, by the end of the year, the very first shipments of Yamaguchi motorcycles arrived in America, and they included a series of 50cc two-stroke engines. One was an SPB Scrambler that was used for road and trail. There was an AP2 Standard, a BPC Deluxe, and a BP50 scooter. They also had an ST2 Super Twin that was a 125cc road bike. In the beginning, it seemed like the partnership between PBATCO and Yamaguchi was a match made in heaven. Yamaguchi motorcycles quickly became their most significant line of business, and by 1963, PBATCO had imported and sold more than 5,000 machines and had a distribution network of 480 dealers. But there's a reason that you don't have a Yamaguchi motorcycle in your garage right now. In April of 1963, in a shocking turn of events, as the story goes, Yamaguchi would inform PBATCO that they would be ceasing operations immediately, as Yamaguchi had went bankrupt and ran the company's finances into the ground, supporting his daughter's election campaign into Japan's parliament. Now, as it turns out, the daughter was successful and became Japan's first female senator. While this was great for Japan, this obviously sucks for PBATCO. After all of that hard work that they had done, followed by such incredible success of that partnership, to be hung out to dry like that is cruel. But PBATCO wasn't the only one hung out to dry by Yamaguchi's exit. So was a small Japanese company named Hodaka, who made the engines for the Yamaguchi motorcycles. PBATCO wanted to stay in the motorcycling business because the importing of Yamaguchi motorcycles had been quite profitable for them. Also, motorcycling was a very big part of Kepka's life, and the more that PBATCO considered their options, the more an answer would come to them. And that answer was, screw Yamaguchi motorcycles, let's build our own bike. So Hank Kepka proposes to Hodaka that PBATCO will design and market a motorcycle for America. But Hodaka has to build the whole thing, not just the engine. Now, this obviously worried Hodaka, as they had only been in operation for a little more than 10 years, and they had never built a complete motorcycle before. Only motorcycle engines, and their very first contact they ever had was with Yamaguchi motorcycles. But nonetheless, Kepka persuades them to do so. Now, that's probably because Hodaka, just like PBATCO, didn't have a choice in the matter. Yamaguchi was their biggest customer and largest revenue stream, and now they have been left with nothing. It's also worth noting at this time that PBATCO had just started importing motorcycles built in Britain by the Cotton Motorcycle Company. So Hodaka kinda had to adapt here or die. Now, Hank Kepka was convinced that a small bore lightweight trail bike was the ideal direction for the company to take. And Kepka, along with Chuck Swanson, decided to build on the good qualities of the Yamaguchi SPB50 Scrambler, as well as fix the negatives. They also didn't want to go head-to-head with the likes of Honda or Suzuki, but rather build a totally original concept to their own design under their own rules. Their first rule was to keep the machines simple and then start making them simpler. They believed the fewer number of components that you had on the bike, the less things that would break down. Parts would be easier to obtain and much less costly for the customer to replace. Secondly, they wanted to stick to the idea of what a motorcycle has to do. If you can change something on the bike to make it better, then do it. But otherwise, if it's working well, never fall prey to the idea that something has to be changed just to become different. Third was to build a motorcycle in a size that would perform well enough to satisfy the desires of most enthusiasts, yet be light and nimble enough to be enjoyed by the weekend warrior. And last, their goal was to keep the price within reach of anyone that feels they might want to try out motorcycling. To them, motorcycling is essentially a sport we do for fun, and no one should have to seriously strain their budget to enjoy it. And what Hodaka would do was something that no manufacturer had ever done before, and sure in the hell wouldn't do today, and that was to create a base motorcycle platform and improve on it over time. That way, whenever they updated the motorcycle's design, the newer and better parts could be retrofitted onto the older models, allowing the owners to always keep their Hodakas up to date instead of forking over cash for a brand new motorcycle. And what they came up with was a motorcycle called the Ace 90. It was a single-cylinder two-stroke with a 4-speed gearbox that produced a little over 8 horsepower. While the power numbers were anything but daunting, the little Ace could still do 60 miles per hour on the freeway, but what made it a good bike is that what you ended up getting for the money that you spent. The Ace 90 was an on- and off-road capable machine that had an unmistakable metal tank, adjustable folding foot pegs, high ground clearance, high fenders, a seat with thick foam padding, a tire pump, full lighting equipment, dual rear sprockets, a speedometer, a carrying rack, and it included a toolbox with tools, all for the retail price at the time of $379 United States dollars. Now, adding in inflation, that would equate to about $3,775 US dollars today. Not bad, since today manufacturers find it kosher after you drop $18K on a premium motorcycle, they toss in an anemic toolkit from Sky Mall that looks like this. Because of the bike's price, its features, and Hodaka's durable engines, the Ace went full Hodaka-licious. Between 1964 and 1970, Pabatco sold over 24,000 Ace 90s and Ace 100s as it worked its way to the forefront of the trail bike market. In fact, many historians give Hodaka credit for creating the off-road trail bike market. Well, that's debatable. Nonetheless, this was an amazing motorcycle, and quite a feat for a company that looked extinction squarely in the eyes just a few years earlier. But a big reason for Hodaka and Pabatco's success was their ability to listen and to connect with their customers. They were the type of company that was accessible, and right from the start, they connected with riders via clever advertisements and catchphrases. Head of marketing Marvin Foster believed that the more you tell, the more you sell. So instead of just running small advertisements, they would do full-page storied ads that talked about Hodaka's features and accomplishments. Each full-page black and white advertisement had a coupon with it so that the reader could send in a quarter and get a copy of the Hodaka story. It would explain why Hodaka was the best brand for the racer and weekend warrior. And back in those days, no motorcycle manufacturer had ever seen or done anything like this. Hodaka sold people on the family atmosphere, that motorcycle riders are just one big family and we're all in this together, and it worked. With Hodaka sales in full force, Marvin Foster, along with Frank Wheeler, decided to step up their theatrics and marketing efforts and take it a step further, when they each rode Ace 90s to the tip of the Baja Peninsula and back. 30 days of rough, adventurous riding with no outside support, just the shirts on their backs and a few cans of oil, showing that the performance and durability of Hodaka's was unmatched, and at which time they coined the phrase Hodakability. In 1967, the Ace 100 would replace the Ace 90, and it was more of the same. A little faster, a 5-speed wide ratio gearbox in place of the 4-speed, a little bit better suspension, a little more refinement, and a lot more street and trail performance. Everybody was winning motocross, scramblers, desert races, and TT events around the country on the Ace 90 and Ace 100s. But it would get better for Hodaka. With the success of the Ace, Hodaka then decides to make a purpose-built racer version of the bike that would be called the Ace 100 MX. Basically, it's a stripped-down race version of the Ace 100, which is what customers were doing to the bikes anyway. But as legend has it, when the first prototype of the Ace showed up at Pabatco, they had the initials SR on the bike, meaning Special Racer. But parts manager Roger Phillips jokingly looked at it and said, "What does the SR stand for? Super Rat?" Everyone liked that name so much that they decided that's what they're going to call the bike, a Super Rat. But the Super Rat wasn't a marketing gimmick. It was a legit racing weapon, and straight out of the box for less than 500 United States dollars, it could not be beat. And as the legendary Malcolm Smith would say about the bike, is that if you raced a trail bike desert class, you either rode a Super Rat or you wished that you did. He would go on to say that the Super Rat was the answer for a lot of people. Everyone, women, kids, full-grown men, experts, and beginners, everyone could ride this motorcycle, and it was competitive and affordable. So anybody that was in the market for an off-road trail bike, your best choice was to buy a Super Rat. And many of today's motorcycling legends got their starts on these bikes, like Tommy Croft, Brad Lackey, Jim Pomeroy, Jody Weisel, Gary Bailey, Don Castro, Mark Blackwell, Chuck Sun, Brian Myerscough, and well, the list just keeps on going. And all around the country, Hodakas were winning races in the 500-mile Greenhorn Enduro, the National Trail Bike Championships, and the Pike Peak Hill Climb. I mean, the Super Rat was the bike to have. It was a rare motorcycle that could fit both the novice and the pro. That would make the company a household name, and Hodaka would capitalize on the success of the Super Rat by deciding from here on out, they will no longer issue model numbers for their motorcycles, but they will name them. That way they become more memorable, and more memorable they would be. The Super Rat was followed by the 125 Wombat, the 125 Combat Wombat, and the 125 Super Combat. They would add trail and street versions to their line like the Dirt Squirt, the Road Toad, and Thunderdog. They even went as far as creating cartoon characters for each motorcycle to complement its name, and that reinforced the playful, whimsical nature of Hodaka motorcycles. Hodaka and Pabatco had it all at this time. They went from being ghosted years ago by Yamaguchi Motorcycles to becoming the 6th largest motorcycling brand behind Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, Suzuki, and Harley Davidson. And they were selling more off-road machines than anyone. They were hip. They had rock-solid machines with attitude. They had the it factor. But obviously there's a reason you don't have a Hodaka dealership in your neighborhood trying to sell you a 2024 model. Because in 1978, just a few years after being on top of the world, Hodaka vanished. So the question is, what in the hell happened? You had the Hodaka wide world by the toes. You were one of the largest motorcycle brands in existence, and you just vanished? Well, like all things in life, it's never just one thing, rather a series of things that set off a chain of events that eventually snowball out of control. In the book Hodaka, The Complete Story of America's Favorite Trail Bike, written by Ken Smith, he writes that one of the issues happened right in the midst of Hodaka's success when Shell Oil swallowed up their subsidiary and assumed full control of Farm Chemical. Now obviously Henry Kepko was not on board with the takeover, but at the end of the day, he's just an employee, not an owner. And after the takeover, the previous owners of Farm Chemical, Jerry Whitney, took his profit and left. Clarence Hesp would stay on board for a while, but then he ultimately left, and Ed Miley would stay and took direct control of Pabatco. Now in the early years, the new owners of Pabatco were content by leaving the company alone. They didn't really want to take over a motorcycle company in the first place. It was the Farm Chemical unit that they were after. And Pabatco was profitable at the time, never really made any demands, so Shell just kind of let them get on with their job. However, a bigger blow would strike the company as well as Pabatco when Henry Kepka would be tragically killed in a motorcycle accident. Chuck Swanson would step in and act as general manager, and he was well liked within the company, but Chuck Swanson was not the same without Kepka. The magic that those two put together was a big reason for the success of Hodaka motorcycles. However, as I highlighted in some of my past videos, as was the situation with Bultaco, who had employee conflicts, and Mako, who had family conflicts, it just seems that any internal strife or any traumatic company experiences of any kind internally leads to quality control issues. The Combat Wombat and Super Combat were not truly competitive after that, with other new model motocross bikes being released at the time. And the customers suddenly wanted brand new models every year, since Japan's Big Four were adding new technology and new motorcycles each year. Then when Honda would release the infamous 125 Elsinore, which probably should be the motorcycle of the decade because no other bike in any category ever bankrupted its competition like the Honda Elsinore, Hodaka had fallen out of favor with its once loyal crowd. Now with Hodaka clinging on to a financial thread, things would go from bad to worse when the United States economy would enter a recession in the late 70s. The dollar would become devalued against the yen, making Japanese products too expensive for the American market. Now, Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki were large enough at the time to survive this downturn. And they could survive selling their bikes at a loss because they had other profits from other industries. Motorcycles were not, and still are not, their only source of revenue. But that wasn't the case for Hodaka and Pabatco. They had no choice but to lower their prices, and this ultimately destroyed them. But wait, it gets worse. I'm sure you heard the quote, "Hard times reveal who your real friends are," or something of the like. Because it's always the people that are right in front of us, the ones that we know best, that turn out to be our worst enemies. And that's how it would be for Pabatco. In the mid-1970s, Hodaka had been slow to respond to requests to move forward with production of the 175, which didn't appear in showrooms until 1977, almost 2 years late. It's as if they were in no hurry to fulfill their contract obligations, like they had something better to do, and I guess according to Hodaka, they did. Because when Pabatco's sales of Hodaka motorcycles began to slow, they started negotiating with other manufacturers to sell their engines to. But they did this in secret. So Hodaka starts selling its engines to other outside sources without Pabatco even knowing about it. I mean, who needs enemies when you got friends, right? Also, with the rapid advancement of Japan's Big Four that's now offering cheaper and better motorcycles, the expensive importing costs along with computer technology that has made research and development and inter-office work more streamlined for the other motorcycle brands, Hodaka is now in deep trouble. Word is they were still keeping their records in notebooks, so they had failed along the way to update their internal structure. With sales rapidly declining, Shell Oil now looks at this business that they inherited after an agricultural takeover that they never really wanted in the first place as an annoyance. It's like that paint color your significant other chooses for the room that you're really not on board with. You just did it to compromise. But then as a few years go by, it starts to get on your nerves and you just kind of keep wondering, like, how long are we going to stick with this color? Anyway, Shell makes an attempt to sell the whole Pabatco operation in the first half of 1978. But by that time, everyone in the industry knows that Pabatco and Hodaka were toxic. And of course, they didn't get a buyer. But Shell makes one last attempt at saving Pabatco by trying to purchase the Hodaka engine plant. Why? I don't know. But Hodaka wouldn't sell. Why? I don't know. So Shell decides not to renew the manufacturing contract, and just like that, Pabatco is gone. Hodaka, now without the help of Pabatco, doesn't last long either. Shortly thereafter, they would liquidate their business and sell all their tools to a Korean company that would use them to make motorcycles for the Asian market. And just like that, the little company that could, that made America's favorite trail bike, is gone. But not forgotten. I'm sure you've heard the phrase meteoric rise. It's often used metaphorically as a way to signify a rapid explosion of brilliance, an abrupt surge or escalation of achievement, success, or eminence. It's a way to explain the unexplainable, the unexpected, the unplanned. But the truth is, meteors don't rise, they fall. They blaze brightly through the sky in all of their glory, and right at that moment when they pass before our eyes, do we truly understand how brilliant, unique, and unforgettable they are. And that was Hodaka and Pabatko. Even though their time was short, it was impactful. They came from literally out of nowhere to having a seat at the big boys table in just a few years. They changed the world of motorcycling with their whimsical, laid-back approach that inspired people to just get out there and ride. So much so that every year, thousands of motorcycling enthusiasts from all over the world ascend on the little town of Athena, Oregon, the ancestral home of Pabatko and the birthplace of the Hodaka movement, to share their enthusiasm and passion for all things Hodaka, to revisit the very best of times, to share the best of stories, and to unlock that special part of their brain that stores those nostalgic memories. As an aging Gen Xer myself in the late 1970s, I vividly remember the sound of a dirt squirt screaming through the neighborhood. I remember how cool Hodaka motorcycles were. And even years after they stopped making bikes, I proudly kept that Hodaka poster on my wall in my bedroom, right there next to my Farrah Fawcett poster. In Japan, they have a saying that goes Ichigo Ichie. It means for this time only, or once in a lifetime. It's a stark reminder that sadly, every moment in life and every experience can never be repeated, no matter how hard we try. It's a reminder that the future is promised to no one, and all that we have is the now. Because the world does move fast. It is ever flowing, constantly morphing, shifting itself around universal law and humanity's choices. And for Hodaka and Pabatko, well, their impact and contribution and inspiration to motorcycling cannot and will not be duplicated again. And while that is unfortunate and very sad, just remember that us Americans have a saying that goes, well, that was fun while it lasted. Peace out. I got a skitty.